I'm going to do a short prophecy update. I apologize in the delay in getting it up. I did take a little vacation. I was also speaking at a church, another church this past weekend on Sunday with my good friend Eric Barger. When I get the audio links, I apologize for the delay in getting up this week's prophecy update. I did decide to take a little vacation. I also was speaking at another church this past Sunday with my good friend Eric Barger. I'll try to put up the links to the audio when the church gets those posted on the internet. This week's update I'm going to call I'm Not Shutting Up, and I think it'll be obvious what we're talking about. As you know from listening to these prophecy updates, one of the things that we look at is the convergence of the signs of the end times. It seems that not only are a lot of things coming about, but everything is in play. And it appears that as these events get closer and closer to their ultimate climax, which is the second coming of Jesus Christ, the acceleration of the events and the things that are associated with them cause quite a bit of turbulence in the world. And I think we're beginning to see the beginnings of that right now. Now, we're certainly not at the point where we're seeing everything happen, but we certainly are in the period of time where there is a stage setting of a lot of the events so that they can take place. We've talked the last couple weeks about the time of Jacob's trouble and the period of time known as the Great Tribulation, which I think are the same period of time. One of the things that, as we watch these events unfold, we know that in Revelation chapter 22, verse 12, Jesus says, "And behold, I come quickly." Now, I think one valid interpretation of that verse is that it means that when things begin to happen prophetically, when things that have been predicted to happen begin to happen, they will happen very quickly. And there will appear to be an acceleration of those events. And one of the things when people like Eric Barger and myself get together and talk, the subject that always comes up is, can you believe what you're seeing happening, and can you believe how fast things are happening? I thought I would go back and review something that I did previously, and maybe some of the people that are new to the prophecy update haven't seen, but something to explain the concept of exponential growth. Let's say that we take Yankee Stadium, and as an old Indians fan in my younger days, doing this to Yankee Stadium is quite a delightful thought. Let's take Yankee Stadium and let's make it watertight, and let's chain someone to the top row at Yankee Stadium. We're going to start at noon, and what we're going to do is we're going to take an eyedropper, and we're going to drop one drop of water at noon. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to double that every minute. And the question will be, how long do you think that the person chained to the top row, a seat in the top row, has to get free before he drowns? In other words, how long will it take to fill the stadium? So what we're going to do is we're going to start at noon. We're going to drop one drop of water. And remember, the stadium is watertight. At 12:01, we're going to drop 2 drops of water. And then a minute later, 4 drops of water. A minute later, 8. Another minute later, 16. Another minute later, 32. And so the question will be, is doubling the amount of water every minute, how long will it take for Yankee Stadium to be filled completely with water? I think you would be stunned to find out. Most people say a day, 2 days, a number of hours. The answer is less than 50 minutes. If the person has not freed himself from being chained to that seat in the top row, in 50 minutes he will drown. That is the concept of exponential growth. And that's just a very simple example. I could give you many other examples. For example, and so when this stadium is filling up, while in about 50 minutes it fills to overflowing. Several minutes before that, at about 12:45 p.m., the stadium is still 97% empty. That shows you how exponential growth causes an acceleration. And I think this is exactly what we're going to see in the end times. And we know that prophecy is pattern. So when we look at what's happened at the time of the first coming of Christ, that will show us a pattern as to what's going to happen at the second coming of Christ. And what we see in this timeline of the Messiah's ministry on earth is that there were many, many prophecies that had to be fulfilled during his first coming. Those prophecies had been in place for thousands of years in some instances. There was also a period of time prior to the Messiah's birth where it was referred to as the 400 years of silence, in which no prophets wrote scripture. There were significant things that happened in that. There were, for example, the period of the Maccabees, which was prophesied in part by the prophet Daniel. We also know that an event that happened during the time of the Maccabees, which we now know is known as Hanukkah, or the Feast of Dedication, or maybe more properly, the Feast of Rededication, that happened first, the miracle that happened during the time of the Maccabees, which Jesus himself celebrated. We know that the prophecy started to be fulfilled at the time, or maybe shortly before, the birth of Jesus. Now, what you find is, if you look at the fulfillment of these prophecies, is what you will find is that up until the final week of Jesus' life here on earth, before his death, burial, and resurrection, about 40% of all of the messianic prophecies related to his first coming were fulfilled over a roughly 3.5-year period. But you will also find is that 60% of those, actually the number might be closer to 58%, but let's call it 60% of all of the prophecies related to the Messiah's first coming occurred in the last week of his life. I think that's a perfect pattern for what we're going to see happen in the end times. As we get closer to the second coming of Christ, we're going to see this acceleration of Bible prophecies being fulfilled. As we've talked, I believe that we're already to the point where we can say that living in the days of Lot is a prophecy that has in great part already been fulfilled. I think as we look at the events of the past week, we might be able to say that the days of Noah, a pattern that Jesus himself laid out, it will be as in the days of Noah, that prophecy is also nearing fulfillment. Not complete fulfillment, but it's certainly unmistakable, I think, that we live at that time. Now, today I'm going to talk about a few different topics. I'm going to look a little bit at some things that the Pope said, and some other things related to Roman Catholicism that I find very interesting from a prophetic standpoint, just because of the fact that it's the way that they're being mentioned. We'll take a brief look at things going on in the Middle East, and then we'll look at just some of the things that are going on with the San Bernardino shooting that I think is probably something that we need to talk about. And I think there are some things that are happening with regard to that need to be discussed. But let's talk to the Pope for just a minute. You know, the Pope came to Washington just a couple of months ago to wild adulation from the crowds. He gave a speech at Congress. At the time he spoke at Congress, he talked about a number of different people, including a Cistercian monk named Thomas Merton, someone who dealt in the contemplative, who was really probably more of a Buddhist than he was a Catholic, yet has been extremely influential not only in the Roman Catholic Church, but also in modern evangelicalism through the contemplative movement. It's interesting that the Pope this week, though, was again talking about climate change. And remember that the religion of the Pope is not really Christianity in any sense or form. It is really, his religion really is leftism. And Christianity, or using Christian terms, is merely a prop that he uses to further his leftist agenda. So again, he was talking this week a little bit about climate change. For example, you see this headline here from the Vatican Insider saying, regarding the climate, it's either now or never, we are on the verge of suicide. And the climate summit took place recently, and all the leaders of the world came, 147 nations, to talk about global climate change in the face of a real threat, which is terrorism, global terrorism, mainly from radical Islamic extremists. But the Pope said this interesting question. Somebody asked him about religious fundamentalism. This is what he said. Religious fundamentalism is threatening the whole planet. We saw this with, now again, they never mentioned the religion that's actually causing this. We saw this with the Paris attacks. In the face of this danger, do you think religious leaders should intervene more in the political sphere? And the Pope said this: if intervening in the political sphere means doing politics, then no. They should be priests, pastors, imams, rabbis. Their political intervention is indirect. They preach values, real values, and one of the greatest values of all is fraternity between us. We are all God's children. We have all the same Father. I don't like the word tolerance. We need to live peacefully alongside one another, develop friendships. But notice what he says there. We are all God's children. We all have the same Father. Again, you need to understand that the Pope's religion is really leftism. And so he sees this unity among all religions, Catholicism and Islam, to be specific. I think this is a trend that you're going to see, that there's going to be this increasing marginalization of people who are considered to be fundamentalists, and they're going to be treated as if they're exactly the same. Another interesting thing that developed was in National Geographic. Now, National Geographic is a publication that is pro-evolution. It's pro-climate change. For example, you see two covers from just the past year, The War on Science and Almost Human. And this is a cover story on Mary, the world's most powerful woman. And the article is laced with pictures of people worshiping the Virgin Mary. But what is also interesting is that the National Geographic included graphics in this article which show all of the sightings, over 2,000 by their count, all of the sightings of Marian apparitions in the world since 40 AD. They also took time to specifically focus on the apparitions that have been documented by Roman Catholicism and have taken place in Europe. Now, I find it very interesting that a pro-science, pro-climate change, pro-evolution magazine would take time to focus on this particular item of faith. I'm not sure what to make of it, but I do think that this is indicative of this sort of universal spirituality that seems to be coming to the fore among these people who are trying to put in place a global government and a new world order. We also saw a report that came out this week, the Global Peace Index, which indicated that there has been an increase in terrorist activity, 80% higher than the previous year, an all-time record. It showed that some regions of the world, as you know from listening to these updates, some regions of the world are in a constant state of war and turmoil and conflict. One of those areas, the most probably important one right now, is Syria. There is tremendous violence taking place in Syria, has been now for 4.5 years, almost 5 years. I think this is indicative of a pattern that we're going to see in the end times. Jesus said that it would be as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be also in the days of the Son of Man. And we know that the days of Noah, in Genesis chapter 6, verse 11, it says the earth was also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. So one thing to keep in mind about the war in Syria and the Russian involvement, and I think the Institute for the Study of War, you can access their articles and publications at understandingwar.org, said this: Russia's false ISIS narrative in Syria. Look at what the Institute for the Study of War said about this. And this is something you need to keep in mind, is I see a lot of people saying that Russia's the great defender of Christians in the world and in the Middle East right now. Russia is doing the best at holding to traditional Christian values in terms of opposite-sex marriage and that sort of thing. But you also need to remember that the Russians are masters of deception, and that they are sometimes, many times, almost all the time, putting up a facade and trying to misdirect you as to what their real intentions are. But the Institute for Study of War puts this out: Russia's false ISIS narrative in Syria. Listen to what it says. President Vladimir Putin is actively misinforming his domestic audience and the international community about Russia's first military intervention outside the former Soviet Union since Afghanistan. Putin has created a false narrative about the Islamic State of Iraq and al-Sham, ISIS, to disguise the true objectives behind Russia's intervention in Syria, and is using this narrative to manipulate the international community. Putin encapsulated this false narrative in his UN speech calling for an alternate international coalition against ISIS on September 28, 2 days before the start of Russia's air campaign in Syria. Russia intervened in Syria on September 30, not to defeat ISIS, but rather to curb U.S. influence in the Middle East and to project Russian military power into the region to a historically unprecedented degree. And we see that while there have been some Russian airstrikes against ISIS targets, for the most part, the Russian airstrikes have been against the rebels that are opposing the continuation of the Assad regime. And we can see how Syria is divided into many pieces right now. The Kurds in the north and east. The red area there represents the regime, the Assad regime. The yellow areas represent the rebels and the areas that they control, and then the black and gray areas represent the areas controlled by ISIS. You can see that ISIS controls a significant amount of the water that flows through Syria and the Euphrates River, which is a very important river not only to Iraq but also to Syria. And so just keep in mind that this Russian misdirection is something that you need to watch for as you analyze things that are happening in the Middle East. Hillary Clinton came out in a speech at the Saban Forum, and I'll talk about that. The Brookings Institute has an annual Saban Forum in which people come to discuss issues related to Israel and the Middle East. She spoke over the weekend as did John Kerry. Benjamin Netanyahu sent a video speech that was played. I'll be talking about that probably more this coming Sunday. But at the Saban Forum, Clinton said this: the black flag of ISIS may take over from the PA, the Palestinian Authority. And this is a concern. The Palestinian Authority seems to be in a state of collapse, and the question is, what is going to happen if the Palestinian Authority collapses or just goes away? Who's going to take over? Is it going to be ISIS? Is it going to be Hamas? And people are not very optimistic about this. And I think that this, we'll talk about this more in coming weeks, I think this has some prophetic implications, particularly with what's set out in Ezekiel chapters 35 and 36. But back to our subject, and I think the most important thing that we need to talk about this week is the shootings in San Bernardino. I was, when I was out of town earlier this week, I actually was within a few hundred yards of the scene of the shootings in San Bernardino. So it's very strange to be so close to where such a terrible, horrible terrorist act occurred. It brought back a lot of memories from my time back in around 2001 and 9/11 when I was traveling to New York City on a fairly regular basis and seeing the firehouses as you walk through Midtown Manhattan with memorials to the firefighters who had given their lives in an attempt to rescue people from that horrific act that took place on 9/11. I want to look, though, at the reaction that some people have had to this terrorist attack. I want to look at some of the things that I see that are happening in the government that I think are prophetically significant, and I think it's something that people in the faithful remnant church need to be prepared, frankly, to face some persecution. For example, here was the headline of the New York Daily News the day after the terrorist attack in San Bernardino. 14 dead in California mass shooting. God isn't fixing this. Now, what they did in this article and in this newspaper was they essentially mocked Republicans and others who had said that their thoughts and prayers were with the victims of this terrorist attack. Because you see, what's important to the left and the people that run some of these media outlets is that they put out this narrative that you need to not worship a God that you find in a Bible or a holy book, but you need to worship the God of government, because that is what's going to save you. It was a horrific scene. 14 people killed. There was a shootout in a neighborhood near, very close to people that I know. There were calls for we need to be calm. We don't need to be driven by fear. We don't know what this is. We need to investigate this. We don't know what the cause of. Now, it's interesting. In Paris, they were able to say that the cause, the cause of the terrorist attacks was Islam within 2 hours of the attacks. It's several days now since the attacks took place, and our government is still dancing around identifying what the real cause of this was. But here in the New York Daily News again, they said this: faith's not enough. In other words, we don't want your faith in God to be involved in this. We don't want your thoughts and prayers. You need to worship at the altar of the God of government. But perhaps the most egregious thing that I saw said about the San Bernardino killing came from the editorial by Linda Stasi in Sunday's New York Daily News titled "Bloodbath Born of Bigots." Now, one of the people that was killed in this terrorist attack was a recently converted, within the last couple of years, a Messianic Jew. And it's from the stories that we're told that we were told that there were times in the past when the person who perpetrated, one of the people who perpetrated this terrorist attack, worked at the community center where this Messianic Jewish man also worked, and that they had had some discussions about the nature of Islam and the gospel and that sort of thing. So Linda Stasi, when she wrote her article, noted that there were here's what she says. Let's just look at exactly what she says so there's no question about it. They, meaning the shooter and this Messianic Jew, were two hate-filled, bigoted municipal employees interacting in one department. So you see what she's done. She's taken this terrorist and she's taken this Messianic Jew who, there's absolutely no evidence and no proof that he was violent in any way, that he had just discussed his faith with this gentleman. But to Linda Stasi, who apparently worships at the god of government, this is unacceptable. Anyone who has a faith is the same. They are bigoted. They are hate-filled. And then this is one of the statements in this article that really angers me more than almost any of the others. Now, there were 14 people killed by this terrorist couple. 14. But in her article, in her editorial, she says this: now 13 innocent people are dead in unspeakable carnage. In other words, the Messianic Jew was not innocent. He was as much at fault as anyone else. This is an outrageous statement. One man, she says, spent his free time writing frightening, NRA-loving, hate-filled screeds on Facebook about the other's religion. So in other words, if you criticize Islam, you're a hate-filled bigot. Remember the ads that are run on the radio and TV about see something, say something? It really should say see something, say something, be labeled a hate-filled bigot, and it's okay if you be killed for saying that. Listen to what else she says. The other man, the victim, Nicholas Thalasinos, was a radical, born-again Christian Messianic Jew who also connected with his future wife online. You see how she's trying to make the Messianic Jew to be out just the same as this Islamic terrorist. And had traveled across the country to meet her. See, they did the same thing. The killer, however, became half of an Islamic Bonnie and Clyde, while the other died as the male equivalent of Pamela Geller. So it's okay that he died. He wasn't innocent. He was a hate-filled bigot. He opposed Islam, and he needed to die. This is one of the most outrageous editorials that I've ever seen. This Linda Stasi is a fool. She is evil. It's just outrageous that she would say this. Listen to this. The killers deserve every disgusting adjective thrown at them, and more. But the victim is also inaccurately being eulogized as a kind and loving religious man. Make no mistake, as disgusting and deservedly dead as the hate-filled, fanatical Muslim killers were, Thalasinos was also a hate-filled bigot. Death can't change that. But in the U.S., we don't die for speaking our minds, or we're not supposed to anyway. This is outrageous. Thalasinos was an anti-government, anti-Islam, pro-NRA, rabidly anti-Planned Parenthood kind of guy who posted that it would be freaking awesome if hateful Ann Coulter was named head of Homeland Security. We have freedom of speech, but even so, a city worker should refrain from such public bigotry. Municipal workers have been fired for spewing and posting racial and sexual slurs. But it's not as if one person holds or espouses these type of things, or the type of things that lead to this hate-filled evil screed of someone like Linda Stasi. They come from people way up in our government. Now, the shootings took place on Wednesday, December 3rd. On Thursday, December 4th, there were a couple of events that took place that we're going to look at. We're going to look at them in the reverse order of how they occurred. The first is Loretta Lynch's speech at the Muslim Advocates Award Dinner at the Ritz-Carlton in Washington, D.C. on Thursday evening, December 4th. The other will be a press conference or a joint statement by Loretta Lynch, the Attorney General of the United States, and FBI Director James Comey, that happened on the morning or early afternoon of December 4th. Now, I want you to take note of this. You don't have time to look at the entire hour and a half program that took place that evening, or all of Attorney General Lynch's comments at this dinner. But one of the things that you should know is that this event took place the day after the San Bernardino shootings. Loretta Lynch is the top law enforcement officer of the government of the United States. Not a single word was uttered at this meeting about the San Bernardino shootings, which were committed by an Islamic terrorist, without question committed by an Islamic terrorist. There is no doubt about the man's motives, what motivated him, what drove him. It was not workplace violence. He is an Islamic terrorist who did this as a terrorist act to instill fear in people. And so here is the chief law enforcement officer of the United States government talking about anti-Muslim rhetoric the day after an Islamic terrorist attack inside the United States of America. This is outrageous. What you will note, I believe I do have it in the clip here, is that they do talk about someone. They talk about the clock kid, but they don't talk about San Bernardino. This is just absolutely outrageous to me. Listen to this couple-minute clip.
I think an issue on the minds of many American Muslims is that since the tragic attacks in Paris 3 weeks ago, there's been a decidedly disturbing uptick in anti-Muslim rhetoric. It's been very divisive, and many of us frankly feel that the rhetoric is the worst that it's ever been.
But we also will not give in to fear. And my message to not just the Muslim community, but the entire American community is we cannot give in to the fear that these backlashes are really based on. Now, obviously, this is a country that is based on free speech, but when it edges towards violence, when we see the potential for someone lifting that mantle of anti-Muslim rhetoric, or, as we saw after 9/11, violence directed at individuals who may not even be Muslims, but may be perceived to be Muslims. And they will suffer just as well, just as much. When we see that, we will take action. And I know people are saying, oh, if we stop the refugees and sign a bill and make people sign to guarantee them, this is not the way. I will look at anything and consider anything that will keep the American people safe, but simply rushing to judgment on something. As a friend of mine once said, you take aggressive action, you don't take impetuous action, because then you waste your resources and you end up doing more harm than good. So my message to the Muslim community is that we stand with you in this. People will try and use things such as you mentioned, such as the zoning laws, to try and make them become a bludgeon against a peaceful religion and a house of worship. Well, and so what I would urge people to do, if you are aware of situations where children are involved, please contact the Department of Justice and the Department of Education. We can provide guidance, we can have conversations. Everything need not result in a lawsuit, but some things do have to go to that area. We have, as you may know, opened an investigation into the case of the young man in Irving, Texas. We will see where that investigation goes. So you have extreme situations like that, but you also have those everyday things that happen, and we have an important role to play. So please think of us there as well.
So she's talking about prosecuting anti-Muslim rhetoric. Now, the reports today were that she has backed off somewhat from these statements and that she's only going to focus on deeds, not words, but deeds, if someone actually follows through on this anti-Muslim rhetoric. But I want you to remember the update that I did around the time that the Pope was coming that was here in America to speak to the UN. They also, remember Attorney General Lynch went to the UN to roll out this Strong Cities project and how America was going to be involved with cities around the world to deal with certain issues, one of which is this, you can see it highlighted in yellow here, a recognition that violent extremism and prevention efforts should not be associated with any particular religion, nationality, or ethnic group. Now, there's a lot that's driving what she's doing, but remember, you need to put her words that she said the day after the San Bernardino shooting in context with this Strong Cities project. And remember, as I went through that report, as you dug down into the websites of the different groups that are associated with this, The focus was, by and large, countering far-right extremism. In other words, it was to counter the very anti-Muslim rhetoric that Attorney General Lynch now says will not be prosecuted, but she is pushing this agenda to do exactly that, to prosecute this, to make it hate speech. And when it's up, you need to go listen to Eric Barger's talk that he gave in one of the hours of the church. We sort of tag team in these two presentations. And part of Eric's talk was his research about Resolution 1618 that was enacted by the United Nations in 2011. And it was essentially a resolution put forth by the 57-member Organization of Islamic Countries to put in place hate speech codes. It essentially, I believe it passed the UN without a vote. So remember that all of this is tied together. So you see here some other things of some of the Free Initiative, which is one of the groups that's working with the Strong Cities Project. Why we should be concerned? Far-right extremism. The Human Face, far-right extremism. Policing the far right. This is a theme that's all through this. They talk about deterrence and how that's going to be done. For example, here's what they say about deterrence to counter violent extremism. We need determined action at all levels of governance. To succeed, we must coordinate our efforts and cooperate across borders. The Strong Cities Network will enable cities across the globe pool our resources, knowledge, and best practices together, and thus leave us standing stronger in the fight against one of the greatest threats to modern society. Now listen, folks, we all know what is a great threat to modern society, but it is never named by this administration. It's never named by people like Barack Obama or Loretta Lynch or Valerie Jarrett. They ignore the thing that is right there in their face. And I believe this is all part of a piece, part of an agenda that they have to bring down the United States of America and to shut up people that might disagree with them. It's very Orwellian in the way that they want to control speech. We also looked at an event that took place the same week as the rolling out of the Strong Cities Project. It was a event co-sponsored by George Washington University's program on extremism and the Southern Poverty Law Center. And the representative of the Attorney General's office that spoke at this conference said, this is a quote from him, the partnership between SPLC, the Southern Poverty Law Center, and George Washington serves as a reminder that violent extremism is neither a new phenomenon nor one that is limited to any single population, religion, or ideology. They treat all people of all religion, of all faith, that hold those beliefs strongly, they treat them the same. To them, they're the same. There's no difference. Regardless of the fact whether one engages in violent acts or not, it makes no difference to them because what they are really all about is the ideology. This was also said at the conference at George Washington. Since its creation in 1971, this was in Loretta Lynch's press release regarding the Strong Cities Network that she issued at the UN. Since its creation in 1971, Southern Poverty Law Center has been an important voice on the wide range of extremist groups throughout this country. The SPLC does the noble work of examining what the threat is, observing it, and reporting on it. The SPLC says it places groups, this is somebody that analyzed them, the SPLC says it places groups, including conservative Christian groups, on its hate list based on their beliefs, not their propensity for violence. It is the Southern Poverty Law Center that is partnering with the Department of Justice to identify hate groups. So when Loretta Lynch goes to the Muslim Advocates Dinner and talks about prosecuting anti-Muslim rhetoric, and then says a few days later, well, I didn't really mean that, I believe that Loretta Lynch is lying. because they are partnering with the Southern Poverty Law Center to identify hate groups. And they do that not based on their beliefs, or they do that, based on their beliefs, not their propensity for violence. This article that analyzed this also said this: Heidi Byrick, the SPLC's Intelligent Project Director, teamed with Carlin, he was the Attorney General's representative at the George Washington Conference, to demonize pro-family groups. She told a reporter that the SPLC classifies groups as hate groups on the basis of ideology. In other words, the SPLC will vilify groups because of what they believe, not because of what they do, or because they have demonstrated any propensity towards violence. And she flatly admits it. We post groups on the basis of ideology, not whether they're violent or not. And this has an impact. Remember the shooting at the Family Research Council done by a guy who had identified the Family Research Council as a hate group, as an anti-gay group. And so what he did was he took weapons to the Family Research Council to assassinate and kill the members of the Family Research Council. He even had Chick-fil-A sandwiches with their names written on them. This has an impact about us, and I think the persecution that it's going to bring. It says this: in his plea agreement, the man who did this shooting at the Family Research Council acknowledged he identified the Family Research Council as an anti-gay organization by visiting Southern Poverty's website. The head of the council, Tony Perkins, called on the group to stop labeling his organization and others as hate groups because of their stance on gay issues. A spokesman for the Alabama-based law center did not immediately return a telephone message. And we also reviewed back a couple months ago, when we looked at this issue the first time, the hate map of the Southern Poverty Law Center. We showed that there were two groups in Columbus, Ohio, Mission America, and Past Assault Ministries, both identified as anti-LGBT, and they are active hate groups in the reasoning or the thinking of the Southern Poverty Law Center, to partner with the Department of Justice in how to identify hate groups. It's interesting, if you look at the Hate Watch that was published on the Southern Poverty Law Center's website just the other day, you will not find the San Bernardino shootings there. So what's happening in Washington is that there appears to be this fog of deception, this sort of madness that is taking place, where the obvious things, the obvious causes of terrorist attacks cannot be discussed, or it's ignored or swept under the rug. And so what happens when this terrorist attack occurred in San Bernardino? Immediately, as you would expect, the president and others came out to push for what? Gun control. And this subject came up at the press conference, I believe on Friday, at the White House. And here's a question that was asked of Josh Earnest and his very interesting response.
President Obama yesterday jumped to say that this mass shooting means it's time for common sense gun laws. Does the president really think that common sense gun laws would deter terrorists now that he has admitted these two may have been terrorists?
Yes. The president believes that passing common sense gun laws that makes it harder for people with bad intentions to get guns makes the country safer.
But so the president thinks that when there are potentially two terrorists sitting around planning a mass murder, they may call it off because President Obama has put in place common sense gun laws.
Well, Peter, we're still learning of the precise motives of the individuals who carried out this heinous act of violence yesterday. One thing we do know is that the 4 firearms that they were wielding were legally purchased under the laws that are in place now. That's a fact. So that might lead some to conclude that we should have made it a little bit harder for them. Would that have changed the entire outcome? We're still investigating the situation. But I guess the question is, why wouldn't we? Why wouldn't we make it harder for them? What's the explanation for that?
Well, this is madness. Now, We know that Loretta Lynch gave this speech at Muslim Advocates on Thursday evening. On Thursday morning, after the terrorist attacks, there was a news conference or statement made by FBI Director James Comey, but when he went to make the statement, lo and behold, Loretta Lynch was sitting there right next to him.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming over. I've joined the director's briefing today, although this will be his briefing. As many of you know, the news from San Bernardino continues to evolve, and obviously we now have seen the names and faces of those victims, the fallen and the injured, and as always, our hearts go out to them, and let's keep them in our prayers, not just those who did lose their lives, but also those who were injured in this, including our law enforcement officials. As we've always told you about this matter, it is an evolving investigation. We also told you we'd keep you informed about this investigation. Just recently, there was a press conference in the local area with the assistant director in charge of the Los Angeles office providing more operational details. The director is going to give you a further briefing as well. As you saw from that, and as we indicated yesterday, the FBI has taken the lead in this investigation. They continue to work with our local partners, who are outstanding partners, also along with the ATF and U.S. Marshals as well, as we continue to investigate this. There's been a lot of new information that's come to light, and the director is going to give you some more insight into that. So thank you all for being here today.
Thank you, Madam Attorney General. Let me begin by echoing the Attorney General's remarks. Our hearts continue to ache for the people lost and wounded in San Bernardino and their families. And I also want to say a word of gratitude and say how impressed we were with the response of local law enforcement in San Bernardino. They were simply amazing. We are all very lucky that really good people become police officers in this country. And then I want to also say a word of thanks to the folks we don't talk about much, which are the people who rendered emergency care and aid, the EMTs, the docs, the nurses, the victim specialists. Those are people who are the angels of our business and don't get the thanks they deserve. So thank you to them. We're here today because we want to make sure you understand that this is now a federal terrorism investigation led by the FBI. And the reason for that is that the investigation so far has developed indications of radicalization by the killers and of potential inspiration by foreign terrorist organizations. There's a lot of evidence in this case that doesn't quite make sense, and so we're trying to be very thoughtful to understand it and to make sense of it so we understand the full extent of what we have here. Let me offer you, though, a couple of specifics on the investigation. First, our investigation to date, and again, it's only 2 days old, so far we have no indication that these killers are part of an organized larger group or form part of a cell. There's no indication that they are part of a network. Again, I quickly add, it is early. We're still working very hard to understand, but I want you to know that so far we don't see such indications. Second, there is nothing in our holdings about these two killers. I have seen reporting where folks have focused on reports that they were in contact, at least one of the killers was in contact with people who had been the subject of FBI investigations, either investigations that were closed or that were still open. I would urge you not to make too much of that. There were no contacts between either of the killers and subjects of our investigations that were of such a significance that it raised these killers up onto our radar screen. We're obviously looking very closely at those contacts, but I would not want you to over-index on that just yet. It is, as I said, 48 hours old. There is much about this that doesn't make sense to for even those of us who do this for a living. That is the reason we have hundreds of people running down leads all over the world on this and spending tremendous amounts of time as we sit here trying to understand the electronic record around these two killers. Let me close by saying something the Attorney General and I have said before, and that is we know that this is very unsettling for the people of the United States. What we hope you will do is not let fear become disabling, but to instead try to channel it into an awareness of your surroundings, to get you to a place where you are living your life, but if you see something that doesn't make sense, you say something to somebody. When we look back over our cases over the last 10, 15 years, in almost every case, we find that somebody saw something whether it was a family member or a friend or a coworker, and didn't say something to law enforcement, wrote an innocent narrative over some facts that were making them feel uncomfortable or making the hair stand up on the back of their necks. Please don't do that. We have worked very, very hard since 9/11 to get ourselves to a place where if you tell a police officer or a deputy sheriff or call the FBI and say, I saw something next door that seems off, or I saw something online that seems off, it will get to the right people, and we will investigate it quickly and responsibly. We investigate in secret so that we don't smear innocent people. We don't run over and bang on your neighbor's door if you say something. We investigate. If there was nothing there, no harm done. If there was something there, great harm may be avoided. So we would ask you, please channel that sense of fear into something healthy, just an awareness of your surroundings, and let us do the work that you pay us to do, which is to investigate and fight terrorism while you live the lives that are so wonderful in this great country of ours. Thank you for this, and we'll take your questions.
Just take a pause.
Well, the feed, I guess, was lost when it came time for the question and answer period. DC Whispers has a report on this, and look at some of the things that they say about what happened with this. FBI Director Comey just finished a briefing to the American public. It was a briefing said to have required the full and prior approval by Valerie Jarrett of Director Comey's public comments. Valerie Jarrett, as you know, is the most trusted advisor to President Clinton. Apparently, Comey initially balked at the direct influence of the White House upon the operational freedoms FBI directors are normally granted. This response initiated countermeasures by Valerie Jarrett herself, who then dispatched Attorney General Loretta Lynch to the public briefing. Lynch's role is alleged to be Obama White House's watchdog over FBI Director Comey's statements and subsequent responses following the most recent Islamic terrorist attack. The impetus for this scenario is said to be twofold. Mr. Obama and Ms. Jarrett are increasingly concerned over anti-Muslim rhetoric not only among the general population and politicians, but among federal, state, and local law enforcement officials who are increasingly concerned further threats to public safety might very well be imminent. They want this tone corrected immediately. Barack Obama is said to have asked during an earlier meeting regarding the San Bernardino terrorist attack how best they could control the message on this. Jarrett operatives have apparently already reached out to and continue to then remind supportive media figures to describe San Bernardino as a shooting and not connected to Islamic terror. It seems the administration's motivation will continue to demand the terror attack be used as yet another tool for further calls for federal gun control laws, despite ever-increasing evidence the attack in San Bernardino was exclusively the result of Muslim terrorism. FBI Director James Comey appears increasingly unwilling to play along with the Obama White House's insistence the actual terror threat be downplayed while the push for gun control could be expanded. Rumors now circulating that Barack Obama recently stood over Director Comey, who was seated at the time, and inquired whose side the FBI director was on. Apparently, the two men have been at odds for months, including Comey's repeated repudiation of the Black Lives Matter movement and its highly negative impact upon law enforcement morale. And so again, we look at what happened at the end of this meeting.
Just take a pause.
So there you see that it appears that the Q&A period was cut off from public consumption because of what they feared that FBI Director Comey might say. So in conclusion, I think that we live in somewhat very disconcerting and troubling times. I think that people are going to be watched for the supposed anti-Muslim rhetoric that they say, or things that they might say, and so I think you just need to keep this in mind. I don't think people should shut up about what is happening or what is going on. but you need to know that it may have consequences. We still have, I think, freedom of speech in this country, but that remains to be seen. I think that there will be increasing pressure on people to keep quiet, and that's why I titled this, I'm Not Shutting Up. Now, the president announced that he was going to give a speech on the terrorist attacks that took place last evening on Sunday evening. I'm recording this on Monday evening. And here is an analysis, sort of a preview of what was going to be discussed in the president's speech and some of the criticisms that it was bringing about, or that it was engendering even before the speech was given.
Talking about ISIS, that's not all that long ago, January 2014. Talking about ISIS, that's not all that long ago, January 2014, trying to downplay the ISIS threat. And then in recent days, the day before the Paris attack and just days before the San Bernardino shooting, the president said this.
I don't think they're gaining strength. What is true is that from the start, our goal has been first to contain, and we have contained them. Right now, we know specific and credible intelligence indicating a plot on the homeland.
Striking as well, just the other day, I covered the White House for 9 years. The press secretary sits in his office every day and gets all this incoming from around the government. What's going on in the government, so that I know what to say when I'm standing at the podium representing the President of the United States. Josh Earnest repeatedly refused to use the word terrorism to talk about San Bernardino. He finishes his briefing, and within minutes, the FBI director and the Attorney General of the United States are out there saying terrorism.
They have been so afraid to use that word. They have been so afraid to, I think they seem fixated to me on this was a gun control argument. This was going to be, that's what this was. He put out a statement very early on. I thought shockingly early, actually, after this shooting on Wednesday. It's clear that, the White House has struggled so much, just in its fear of saying that word and using that word. It's been a problem for them.
Right. This president is so deliberate anyways, and he detests the political culture of rushing out and, making some sweeping statement about issues until you know the facts. But I think there's something to what Jeff is saying, that, politically, in some ways, it is easier for this president to talk about the gun issue than it is the sort of self-created jihadis. It's a much thornier challenge.
Well, that was the discussion. The New York Times, of course, reported, as many newspapers, on the president's statement. He did come out and say it was an act of terrorism, finally. But this is, I think, this is all sort of connected with the increase in terrorism that we see around the world. For example, in Gaza, there's a store called Hitler 2, and you'll see here in the picture as to how they have the mannequins dressed, things they want to sell, which is, accessorize your fashion with a knife. It's clear what they're trying to do. And then in London, just yesterday, we saw a terrorist attack, someone being stabbed with a knife, and so it's not shooting, it's stabbing. And so I think people need to take reasonable steps to protect yourselves and your family. Do what your conscience will allow you to do within reason, within the confines of the law. You have to make those decisions as to what you're going to do. The president's speech was given. I'm not going to dignify it with spending any time playing any clips of it for you. I might in the future, but it was really, to describe it as pathetic would be to give it too much credibility. Here is a little critique of the president's speech by Michelle Malkin.
And there's also this, unfortunately, extreme political correctness when it comes to fighting jihad. As you mentioned, Stuart, these people are so stuck on things like gun control that they can't see that if it wasn't guns, it would have been all of those pipe bombs. This comes on the heels, this gun control lecture and diatribe comes on the heels of the attack in London, which was used with a machete or knives. It doesn't matter what the weapon is. It's about the ideology. And the fact that this man has gone around the planet and attacked Republicans and his political opponents who are willing to call the enemy what it is, and treats us as if we're the true terrorist threat, that really tells you where this administration's twisted priorities are. They have an attorney general who's going to now prosecute the rhetoric of people who speak bluntly about Islam and about jihad. That's who they're going after. This is nuts.
And I would agree. Caroline Glick said this in her column on Friday, 2 days after the terrorist attack in San Bernardino. America's pathological denial of reality. You can go read it at the Jerusalem Post website. Just a couple comments from that. How much lower will America sink before it regains its senses? The data points lead naturally to the conclusion that Farouk and his wife were jihadists who killed in order to kill in the name of Islam. But in America of December 2015, natural conclusions are considered irresponsible at best. It is an issue that needs to be addressed. She goes on to talk about a Muslim imam named Dr. Siddiqui, who used to be president of the Islamic Society of North America, who has brought in radical Muslim imams from around the world to speak and sponsored them, one of which was the blind sheikh who masterminded the first bombing of the World Trade Center. But he used to be president of the Islamic Society of North America, of course, at which this evangelical pastor spoke in 2009. She concludes with this. The fact is that in December 2015, the U.S. is acting with pathological devotion to ideological narratives that bear no relation to reality. And this is part of the world that we live in. This is part of the end days deception. It's part of the end days madness. And I think it's here. I think it's only going to increase from this point forward. When people cannot talk about what something obviously is, that is a major problem. That's an indicator that we live in the times that the prophets have talked about. So that's the conclusion of this prophecy update this week. We'll be back with a full report next Sunday. Thank you very much for listening.